The observation deck of the Celestial Traverse hummed with tension as Ambassador Crosthor of the Valnari Empire watched the human woman through the reinforced viewport. His scaled ridge flared in confusion, a biological response his species couldn't suppress when confronted with incomprehensible behavior. Emma Chin moved through the quarantine section with practiced efficiency, her slight frame dwarfed by the massive Valnari cubs that surrounded her. They were orphans from the border skirmishes, 12 juveniles whose parents had fallen in the conflict between the Empire and the rebellious outer colonies. By Valnari law, they should have been culled. Weakness could not be tolerated, but the humans had interfered. "Explain this to me again," Crosthor growled to Jack Morrison, the human liaison officer standing beside him. "Why does she tend to our young before she nourishes herself?" Jack's expression remained neutral, though his eyes tracked Emma's movements with obvious concern. "It's just what we do, Ambassador. The young eat first." "Inefficient," Crosthor hissed. "A weakened caretaker cannot provide adequate protection. She has not consumed sustenance in 2 rotation cycles. Our instruments confirm her biological markers indicate severe depletion." Through the viewport, Emma knelt beside the smallest cub, a runt that would never have survived in Valnari culture. Her hands were steady despite her exhaustion as she carefully administered nutrients through a specialized feeding apparatus. The cub's scales were still soft, its hunting ridge barely developed. "That one is genetically inferior," Crosthor observed. "Why does she waste resources?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Because he's a child. Because he didn't ask to be born into a war. Because Emma believes every life has value." The ambassador's translator struggled with the concept. Value without strength? Purpose without dominance. These were contradictions in the Valnari worldview. Emma moved to the next cub, then the next, her movements growing slower but never less gentle. She sang something, a human lullaby that the translator couldn't properly render. The cubs, naturally aggressive even in youth, had grown calm in her presence. Some even nuzzled against her when she passed, seeking the comfort she somehow provided. 3 days, Jack said quietly. "She's been working for 3 days straight. I've tried to relieve her, but she won't leave until she's certain they're all stable." Crosthor's combat analysis processors identified the truth in Jack's words. The human female was operating at 23% efficiency. Her glucose levels were critically low. Muscle tissue had begun breaking down for energy. Yet she continued. "This is mental deficiency," the ambassador declared. "She will collapse soon. Perhaps expire. Maybe," Jack admitted, his voice rough. "But she won't stop. That's not who she is." Through the viewport, Emma finished with the last cub, a particularly aggressive male who had initially refused human contact. She placed a gentle hand on his broad head, and impossibly, the juvenile settled beneath her touch. Then she moved to the center of the enclosure and slowly lowered herself to the floor. Across Thor's ridge flattened in alarm. "She falls." Jack was already moving toward the access door, but he paused as something extraordinary happened. The cubs gathered around Emma's prone form. The smallest one, the runt, crawled beneath her arm. The aggressive male positioned himself at her back. The others formed a protective circle, their juvenile growls a warning to any threat. They were guarding her. "Impossible," Crosthor breathed. "Valnari young do not protect. They compete. They dominate. They learned." Jack interrupted, his voice filled with wonder. "She showed them a different way." The medical team arrived, but the cubs refused to allow them entry. It took Jack himself, speaking in calm tones and moving with deliberate slowness, to convince the young Valnari to permit access to their caretaker. Even then, they remained close, watching with luminous eyes as the medics stabilized Emma. 2 days later, Crosthor requested an audience aboard the human vessel. He found Emma in the recovery ward, still pale but alert. Jack stood nearby, arms crossed in a protective stance that the ambassador now recognized. "I do not understand your species," Crosthor admitted, his translator rendering the words with unusual precision. "You weaken yourselves for others. You give when you have nothing left to give. By every tactical analysis, this should have led to your extinction." Emma smiled, a gentle expression that somehow made her seem stronger, not weaker. "Maybe that's why we're still here, Ambassador. Because we learned that strength isn't just about taking. It's about what you're willing to give up for those who can't protect themselves." Crosthor's ridge rippled as he processed this. The cubs have imprinted on you. They refuse to eat unless you are present. Our caretakers cannot manage them. They're just scared, Emma said softly. They lost their parents. They needed to know someone cared enough to put them first. The ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then, in a gesture no human had ever witnessed, he lowered his head. The Valnari sign of deepest respect, reserved only for warriors who had proven themselves in impossible battles. You have taught them honor, Krasthor said quietly. You have taught me as well. The Empire was wrong. About the cubs, about culling weakness, about humanity. He raised his head, his eyes meeting Emma's directly. Perhaps true strength is not found in dominance, but in sacrifice. You fed them before feeding yourself. Even an alpha must lower his head before such courage. Jack moved to Emma's side as the ambassador departed, his hand finding hers. You know the cubs won't leave without you now, he said with a slight smile. Emma squeezed his hand, her eyes drifting toward the observation window where 12 young Valnari pressed against the glass, waiting for her return. Then I guess we're taking them home, she said, and in that moment, the galaxy shifted. Not through weapons or treaties, but through the simple act of one human woman who chose compassion over survival and taught an empire what it truly meant to be strong.